Welcome back to my nightmare. So we're back for chapter 2. Chapter 2 of Vane Attraction is a little bit long. Oh, it's not as long as chapter 1. Long for me reading it out loud is mostly it. I think we can do chapters 2 and 3. I think we can get through that, don't you? I think we can. I think that's something we can definitely do. So we're going to try and get through chapter 2 and chapter 3 of Vane Attraction. Give me 1 second. I forgot to get water. Is anyone else like slightly worried that like a face or something is going to appear behind me? I'm just not going to notice until like months later when we watch this video. Please don't. Like, I hope that doesn't happen. Like, please nothing appear behind me. Man, I'm like, yeah, that would be terrifying. Please don't do that. Anyway, so if you didn't know from the first video, this book is dealing with the death of a grandparent. It is dealing with some shitty family dynamics. It is dealing with some internalized, I think, homophobia. I'm not sure. I haven't gotten that far into it. And it's also it's set during a pandemic year. So Vane Attraction is set during the initial COVID lockdown. So that's where we are. Chapter 2 and 3 of Vane Attraction by Avery Morstan, which is me. Do you still need the vibes? We're on like book number 3. Like, the vibes are that you and I are having a slumber party on New Year's Eve, which is when this was filmed, and I'm just reading you a story. Excuse me. Chapter 2. The rest of the day passed in a tense blur. Vane had never been particularly great at dealing with her emotions, which was probably something she should see a therapist about, but it wasn't like doing hair came with health insurance. It should. That one time she sliced her knuckle off would have been a lot better if she'd had insurance instead of an out-of-pocket ER visit. Until she had insurance and a therapist, in that order, she was stuck in a cycle of snap at everything that annoys me, and by the way, everything annoys me. Grief was tearing through her, leaving behind a feral monster who didn't really care much about anything else. Everything was starting to feel overwhelming. Her breakup with Ross, and now her grandma, knowing she was all alone in this world that didn't care if it used you until you ran dry, feeling like she was going to be alone forever. It was all a little too much. Bex, who was licensed in more stuff than Vane, but who specialized in nails, had holed up in the studio room she rented from Vane and only appeared to collect her clients. She'd rented from Vane for long enough to know when it was one of those days. At the end of her shift... I'm sorry, I'm a little uncomfortable right now. At the end of her shift, Bex had twirled her keys, sent Hannah, who did not pay rent and was on commission, a sarcastically pitying glance. Adios, chicas, Bex had said, but what she really meant seemed to be, best of luck, Hannah. Hope you're still alive tomorrow. She escaped through the back door before Vane could snap at her, slick dark ponytail swinging as she went. Bex's escape was better than Hannah's concerned looks. Hannah probably meant well enough, but her constant hovering only stoked the fire of Vane's misguided rage. Vane knew she should have canceled her clients and gone home, but home only seemed to serve to remind her of all the things she'd lost to get where she was today. It was a journey she was proud of, but she wasn't sure it was worth it. Fucking Ross? Fucking Gran? Fucking everyone! Hannah made a quick exit during Vane's last color appointment of the day. Luckily, it was a client who had known her for a while. Not quite as long as Bernadette, but long enough that she called Vane's stormy moods an artist's temperament. As soon as Hannah was gone, Vane admitted in hushed tones during the shampoo service what had happened, and her client was more sympathetic to her attitude. She did the blowout and trim in near silence, and in the end, they were probably both more relaxed because of it. After her client had gone, she took a few minutes to close up shop. She locked the back door, did the evening deposit, and managed to pack up her station and sweep without breaking into ugly sobs that lurked in the cavernous empty hole of a chest. Finally, with the key to her nasty old car in her hand, she locked the front door and turned to look at the courtyard. The The first thing that had really charmed Vane about her salon was the location. It was just off Main Street, set way back from the road in a strange courtyard surrounded by other small businesses. It wasn't that cute at the time because the hipsters hadn't discovered Quaint City, but it had so much potential. The buildings around the courtyard faced each other with a little platform that came off the Gallery QC, creating a stage where they sometimes hosted live musicians. The courtyard, which Vane Attraction, Gallery QC, and Devil's Stomping Grounds all shared, sort of forced foot traffic to stop and gather around their business. It was a unique disruption of the other tourist trap shops that lined the main street, and Vane Attraction was right in the middle of it. Well, you can a little. Eve, who owned Devils, and Vane had pulled their resources over the summer and decorated the courtyard up since more people were sitting outside during the pandemic. They'd added twinkling lights and plants, more tables and chairs, and with autumn setting in, Eve had even set stacks of pumpkins and squash around. In the dim evening light, it was extremely sweet. Vane didn't have much time to appreciate the pumpkins or feel proud at how she and Eve had changed up the area over the last decade because Hannah was waiting for her. She sat in one of those metal chairs outside of Devil's with a paper to-go cup in her hand, shivering into her denim jacket. It was a bit cold now. That Vane was taking notice of the temperature. Hadn't it just been summer? Where had everything gone so quickly? Hannah's curls twisted in the breeze. Her expression was tight and unreadable. Oh, shit. Was she about to quit? Vane couldn't blame her. Vane had been a fucking nightmare today. She grimaced as she watched Hannah stand. Hannah wasn't as tall as Vane, and she was definitely rounder and more well-endowed. But what she lacked in height, she made up for in intimidation. Vane wondered a little about how bossy Hannah might be in bed versus how meek Hannah was in the salon, but she swallowed that thought right down. It wouldn't be good for her to get in the habit of imagining her employees in bed. Samantha, Hannah said. Annoyance flared, and so did Vane's nostrils at the sound of the name she absolutely detested. I want to speak to you. You know, Vane attempted to make her voice into a casual drawl, but she wasn't convinced it was working. It's such a pity that you struggle to remember my name. Your first name is Samantha, Hannah told her, and Vane merely angled her chin and arched her brow. And I've repeatedly asked you to call me Vane because no one calls me Samantha. The last person who had done so, and the only person that Vane had tolerated it from, had apparently died 2 weeks ago, and no one thought to inform her grandchild of the fact. Hannah rolled her eyes. Vane. Was that hard? Vane purred sarcastically. She gestured for Hannah to sit down. Apparently this was going to be a whole thing, and as defensive as Vane was feeling, she knew she had it coming to her. Hopefully, the Devil's employees who were usually in charge of coming out to stack the chairs and chain them against the building at the end of the day wouldn't interrupt them. A glance through the window showed that the reason the chairs weren't already tucked away was due to some kind of event that suspiciously looked like an open mic night. I know you prefer your last name, but I've never been able to figure out why. It doesn't feel right, Hannah said. Her anxious fingers twisted together, but she sat across from Vane with that still sort of condescending look on her face. She pursed her lips. You were an absolute monster today, I hope you realize. Vane gave a casual shrug. I can do what I want. I'm the boss. Hannah's plush lips twisted in a frown. No, you're not allowed to be like that. You're supposed to lead your team, not abuse it. You acted like... Hannah stopped herself. Her eyes went wide with shock, and she clamped her lips tightly together. Vane latched onto that cut-off sentence like a snake on a live mouse. Go on, she dared Hannah through gritted teeth. Say it. A diva, Hannah said smoothly as she tried to calm down. You acted like a diva. That's not what you were going to say. You were going to say I acted like him, Vane snapped. She was wound too tightly to be having this conversation. I am not as bad as Scott, even on my worst day. Today was your worst day, Hannah shot back, her eyes firing with passion, and you were exactly like Scott. Hannah seemed to remember that Vane signed Hannah's paychecks, and her hands twisted together again in that anxious, worrying way that she had. Vane wondered if Hannah was Catholic, because it looked an awful lot like rosary bead twisting. I'm merely saying, while I understand the circumstances behind your attitude today, you cannot expect us to be happy about working in such an uncomfortable atmosphere. You were a beast. And are you speaking alone on this subject, or have you and little Bexy Poo had a bit of a conversation behind my back? Vane asked, and she batted her eyelashes sarcastically. Hannah's expression was equal parts stormy and guilt-ridden. We care about you, boss, Hannah said slowly. Oh, shit. New kink unlocked. Vane almost blushed. You seemed fine when I left you in the office. Did something else happen? Not that anything worse needs to have happened. Not that it's any of your business what happened, Vane said, letting the word business drawl out into a long line of hisses and z's. But I broke up with Ross. Hannah's eyes widened in shock. You broke up with Ross? Not today. I did it a week ago, actually. But he's been kind of stalking me since then, and it's a pain. He called me today, and it just put me in a bad mood, Vane admitted. She felt distinctly uncomfortable. She hated this part. This part of being human, of having friends, of having to admit she was weak somehow. She'd been alone too long. So yeah, that plus finding out about my grandma on social, it was a lot today. Vane choked on the word, but she said it anyway. I'm overwhelmed. Hannah's face melted into something soft and pitying. Of course, Hannah, sweet, caring person that she was, thought Vane deserved pity. Vane was pathetic. Oh, Vane. Vane's throat started to close up at the correction in her name and everything, if she were being truly honest with herself. The reality of what her aunt and her parents, too, if she were being honest, had done. Ooh, we're gonna fix it. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. So sorry about that. The reality of what her aunt had done came crashing down around her. She tried to cover her sniffle with a sharp inhale. Hannah, wisely, stayed quiet. She wasn't sure what Hannah's situation was, but she was fairly sure that Hannah understood about strained relationships with family. At the very least, when Hannah had quit working for Scott, there had been a slow transformation that suggested someone in her life who hadn't been supportive of her life choices was gone. She was still the only stylist in the world that Vane knew who actively chose to wear light colors in a salon setting, but the tent dresses and femme details that Scott tended to force upon his staff disappeared, replaced by a soft butch aesthetic that was driving Vane crazy the more she saw of it. Ross gets me all riled up. He's such a shithead, Vane said. Hannah's hands, so unlike her own. Hannah's hand, so unlike her own in that it was soft and rounded where Vane's was too skinny and probably claw-like with her manicure, reached over the table to grip Vane's hand. He was a bit of a shithead, Hannah agreed with a sigh. Vane's eyes snapped to Hannah's face. You said a curse, Vane said, her lips twitching up. You never curse. Well, Mr. Hey, I'm short on my rent because I went to Atlantic City with the boys and gambled my money away. Can I have some of yours? Probably warrants a curse. Or 8, Hannah said patiently. She squeezed Vane's hand. Or that time. Yeah, no, I don't need to relive all of the times I took him back when I shouldn't have, Vane said. She huffed. Don't date townies. Hannah's hand drew back, but her lips curled into a secretive smile. I don't know. They're not all that bad, are they? If they hang around with Ross, then yes. Yes, they are, Vane quipped. She toyed with a loose thread on the sleeve of her shirt. It was sticking out from under her signature leather jacket. Clothes in this industry never lasted long. Black was a standard uniform color, but between color and bleach stains and chemical processes, it was best not to get too attached to anything. Hannah was frowning again, but if she disagreed with Vane, she didn't say. I should get home. I know it's none of my business, but if you need the day tomorrow, we'll really be okay. You need to take care of yourself, Hannah told her. She was standing, and Vane could really get used to gazing up at Hannah like this. Vane licked her lips before she could stop herself. I'll be okay. I'll see you tomorrow, Vane managed. Hannah smiled, but it was a sad one, and Vane hated every second of it. Be safe. Always, Hannah promised. You too. Vane watched as Hannah walked down the alley towards the parking lot tucked behind the main street. God, that rear end was particularly... Hey, girl, Eve called. Vane turned, her cheeks blushing a furious pink as she realized she'd been caught checking out her employee's ass by another business owner. Eve tutted. You look like shit. I feel like shit, Vane replied. That's bad marketing, Eve told her. It appeared whatever event that had kept Devils open later was over, and Eve and her staff were beginning to tidy up for the night. Vane stood to allow Eve and Kita to start stacking courtyard chairs. Then, feeling entirely stupid, she started to help out because of course she should. She was also a business that used that courtyard. Eve continued talking. No one wants to go to a stylist who looks like shit. What do you care? You don't come over anyway, Vane teased. It was an old argument between them, one that had gone on since the salon opened, and Vane used it any time she wanted to deflect from a topic. Eve snorted. How many times do I have to tell you? Get a black stylist and maybe I'll consider it. As it stands, Katrina knows just what to do with my hair when I walk in the door. No questions asked, Eve replied. What's Katrina getting paid? Vane asked, thinking of the salon that she and Hannah had worked for. Maybe I'll offer a higher commission. Oh no, she went out and got herself one of those suites. She's doing so well. I'm proud of her. It's set up all cute when you walk in, and it's relaxing to know it's just you and your stylist. None of those grumpy salon managers stomping around all day breathing down everyone's neck trying to push product sales. It's peaceful, Eve told her. Vane nodded, knowing that her stupid mood had been tattled to the staff of Devils. She tapped her lips with 2 fingers, a forgotten gesture that meant she was looking for a cigarette. Eve frowned. I thought you quit. Oh shit, I did, but it's been kind of that day, Vane told her, honestly, huffing and then sucking in a lungful of air. She held it for a minute, wishing the oxygen would give her the hit that she was looking for. I found out Gran died. On fucking social media. The bastards didn't even have the courtesy to call me. Honey, Eve said quietly. But she knew Vane well enough to know she shouldn't hug. Vane wasn't a hugger on a good day. On a day like today, well, safer to just not to. Yeah, Vane croaked, and she was definitely not sniffling. The noise that escaped her was her just clearing her throat through her nose. I'm here for you, if you need me, Eve said. I know you are. And, same, if you need anything, Vane replied. What could I possibly need? I've got a booming business despite a global pandemic, and my beautiful partner is literally a therapist, Eve teased. Honey Sweet, Eve's partner, was a popular therapist in Quaint City, and she saw a lot of the same queers that hung out in Eve's coffee shop. Well, just in case you need a backup, Vane said. So are you going to close? Eve asked. Or take a few days off? Vane frowned. Why would I? Girl, your nearest relation died, and they didn't even tell you. That's something most people deal with in grief counseling. Normal people have steady paychecks and insurance. They don't live on commission, like a stylist. It was one of the downsides of the industry, really. Vane loved how creative and artistic she could feel while doing hair, but there was just so many flaws with the system. Commission, insurance, injury, body aches, expensive supplies and classes, the list went on and on. Well, we'll get you one of those crowd-funded things. I'm sure everyone would donate to let you have some time off, Eve said. I wouldn't. Sorry, Vane, but I'm broke, Kita said as she stacked the final chair. Vane winked at her. I wouldn't want it anyway. I'll be fine, Vane replied. Besides, if I leave those two alone for too long, they'll burn the salon down. Bex was doing some viral 1,000 coat of polish challenge today for her channel, and the fumes were disgusting. Oof, I hope she posts the video soon. I love watching her stuff, Kita said. Bex had enough subscribers and sponsors that she could probably make streaming and content creation her entire career, but she loved doing people's nails, and she had a loyal client base. Vane was lucky she was willing to rent the little studio room in the back of the salon. I'd love it if she learned to do that outside of working hours. You ever have to wrap a perm while she's doing some of that nail stuff? I thought I was going to gag earlier, Vane teased, but it was weak. She knew Bex's worth. Eve was examining her nails. You know, I do need a new nail girl. Vane smiled. Say what you want about most small towns, but in the little courtyard pocket of Quaint City, they always found a way to support each other's businesses. I'll talk to Bex and see if she's got an opening. You do that. And if you need anything, Eve said, letting the sentence trail off at the end. Vane nodded. I'll call. They both knew her well enough to know she'd never call. Sorry. Chapter 3. In theory, Vane knew she needed to do better. She refused to turn into a grumpy, tantruming mess like Scott had been. She wasn't setting a good example for her team by acting like a bitch. Tuesday had been in poor taste, but she could make Wednesday a better day. Tense and uncomfortable was not the vision she had for Vane Attraction. She could do better. She would do better. Hannah was once again bouncing around the back door waiting for her. She was wearing her signature pale colors, even though it was October, and most people had switched to darker, muted tones. But she had a really unique khaki-colored coat over her ensemble. It was one of those shirt jackets, which was very butch of her, and it looked vintage. It set off her long blonde curls and her bright eyes. She had a soft-looking scarf wrapped around her long neck, or not long neck, just her neck, and she was holding 2 paper cups from Devil's. Her hair floated like clouds in the early morning breeze. Vane shivered. The heat had broken a long time ago in her poor little car, and the temperature had dropped dramatically compared to the previous day. Thanks, Maryland. Her black sweater was too thin to provide actual warmth, but she knew when she got dressed in the morning that once she was under the heat of constant blow-drying, she wouldn't be cold. After watching Hannah for longer than she intended to, and attempting to stifle a smile that wanted to stretch across her lips at the sight of her, she huffed and got out of her car and shivered again. For all that global warming was real, fall was definitely staking its claim on Quaint City. The air outside was what most romance writers might call crisp, and if this were one of Gran's old bodice rippers, but for Vane's thin frame, that basically meant frigid. She shoved her bare hands in her pockets and tried to look sly as she slid up to Hannah. What's happening, hot stuff? She said, and then instantly blushed as she realized she probably shouldn't have called Hannah hot. She sucked on her cheeks, feeling her lips twist into a pucker. Hannah was blushing too. Vane truly felt like she'd be fine if the earth opened up and swallowed her. Oh, Hannah said. She sunk her teeth in the sweet pink lushness of her bottom lip, and her eyes went wide. I was waiting for you. Well, everything was so tense yesterday, and I know that you've been under some stress from... She halted, and Vane had a feeling she choked on the words from finding your grandmother died. Hannah's lips pressed together for a beat, and then she continued. Just from everything. So I got you this, to make amends. Hannah thrust one of the paper cups toward Vane, and then blushed and looked down, pulling the cup back in her direction. She tilted her head to the side to read the label and then held out the other cup instead. Sorry, I got myself a mocha, and I probably shouldn't have because, it's basically just a hot cocoa, and those are so high in calories. And Vane took the offered cup, which the markings on the side identified to be black coffee, and cut her off. Hey, I'm not Scott. You don't have to apologize for enjoying what you like just because he had food issues. Hannah blushed again, but she looked grateful. Thank you. Sometimes it's just hard to forget the habit. I get it, Vane said with a nod. I've been there. Sometimes I still feel bad when I actually accept a tip from a client. Scott, the former employer they shared, had a habit of taking tips away from stylists for any little reason. He'd call it tax on the electricity we used to train you, or education fund, or tip sharing for the assistants. Once he had it, you never got your cash back. It was the first time Vane managed to slip out of the salon with her actual tip in her actual pocket. She'd felt like Charlie Bucket with the goddamn golden ticket. I'm really trying to forget, Hannah waved with a hand. Him. But it's hard. You'll get there, Vane told her. She was surprised at how gentle she managed to sound. She wasn't known for being super nice. Well, anyway, I thought since you look after all of us, that maybe sometimes we should look after you. So I brought you a coffee. Also, Bex booked you a blowout with a new client, and I overheard the call. You may need the caffeine. Or I could take her. She sounds like a cantankerous old woman, Hannah said, and the adorable look on her face implied that cantankerous was supposed to be a curse word. Vane stifled a laugh. I can handle some nasty old woman, Vane promised her. You work on your own clients. If it were any other stylist, Vane would assume Hannah was just trying to be nice, because the old woman might remind her of Graham or something like that. But in reality, Hannah's clientele were all pretty old. Like, she must have been the only stylist in beauty school that enjoyed rolling perms. So now all the old women in town knew to go to Hannah if you wanted a 50s style blowout or an 80s perm wrapped. Hannah was really just being kind because she knew Vane liked youthful, Instagram-worthy color services and trendy shortcuts. And she didn't get a lot of that in a town like Queen City. If you're sure, Hannah fretted, looking worried. Vane smiled and took a hopefully suave-looking sip from her delicious coffee. Positive, hot stuff, she purred with a wink. Hannah blushed, and they both went inside to start their day. If there were a meme that could be inserted into Vane's life to show a hilarious turn of events, it would be someone in a bad French accent saying 2 hours later. And Vane would know that only the millennials like her would appreciate the joke, but it would be worth it. 2 hours later, the most obnoxious, the most entitled anti-masker sat down in her chair. Ma'am, Vane said for what felt like the 50th time during the shampoo service, I will not ask you again. Please pull up your mask. These stupid things don't actually work, you know, the old lady said as she glared up at Vane from inside the shampoo bowl. The water is too hot. Make it colder. Vane twisted the knob on the water to bring the temperature down. Meanwhile, the woman had her mask, covering her mouth, but not over her nose. It was annoying the way one simple rule seemed so impossible to follow. The woman jerked, and some of the water sprayed down her sweater. It's too cold now. How about now? Vane asked, her words slipping out from between gritted teeth. She twisted the knobs again. I'll have to deal with it, I guess, the woman said. Probably should have learned the woman's name. Vane was pretty sure it was Peggy. It was somewhere on the booking. Maybe Peggy's, sorry, that's the name. Maybe Peggy's eyes glared at Vane as she lathered soap over her damp hair. You got any kids? What the fuck? Vane thought to herself. She tried to smile. She was a freaking professional, wasn't she? Vane could do this. No, I don't. You better get on that. You're old. You'll be too late to have them, maybe Peggy was saying. Vane switched on the water again to rinse the suds out of her hair. Are you even married? Probably one of those lesbians. You've got too much eye stuff on, and that's how I can tell. You'll die without any kids to take care of you. Her words were cut off by an accidental spray to the face. Very accidental. Definitely a highly professional accident. Vane glanced up to where Hannah was standing at the counter staring at Vane in horror as she realized, well, Vane couldn't assume it was horror at what Vane had done. The woman was horrible. Vane was being horrible. The entire situation was bad. So safe to assume she had no idea what part of it Hannah had an issue with. Oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am. Did I get you wet? Vane said in a sugary, sweet voice. The woman glared at her, but Vane managed to get her back to her styling chair. Now bear with me, ma'am. I don't hear so well over the dryer, so I won't be as chatty while we're doing your style. Well, you better do it right. My granddaughter and I are going to lunch together, and I want to look nice in case there's pictures, the woman said. Vane was willing to bet that this woman's granddaughter would not want photographic evidence of the two of them together. But then, memories of her own gran made her feel guilty. She'd give anything to see her grandmother again. The woman in her chair was scowling in the mirror, and she'd pulled her mask down low enough that her lips were visible when she spoke. "Are you sure you even know how to do hair?" "Ma'am, I've been doing hair longer than you think," Vane managed. Her temper was twisting her stomach in knots. Oh my God, my brain. Maybe Peggy regarded her with a skeptical stare. She humped dismissively. "Well, you better do it right. My little Tilly doesn't come to see me often." Vane started to tune her out, mindlessly working product through her thinning gray hair, until maybe Peggy said, "And she's gotten into all of this gay nonsense lately. We're just hoping it's a phase she's going to grow out of." Vane's teeth clicked together before she could throw the woman out of her chair. The front door to the salon opened. The person who walked through was young. Vane couldn't even hazard a guess as to how old, but very young. They were wearing a pretty baggy t-shirt with an even baggier hoodie over it, but there was a small rainbow pin on the chest. Their hair was flipped over to one side. The woman in Vane's chair seemed to seethe. "I told her mother to dress her appropriately," she hissed to Vane. But Vane's eyes were on the kid. And then they were on Hannah. Hannah, who was the most quiet, most polite girl in the salon, went from hetero passing to flamboyant gay man in a queer woman's body, as if a fairy godmother had shown up and hit her with a disco-mirrored wand that sprayed glitter upon bodily contact. Her face transformed from that complacent sweetness she was known for to an alien expression of excitement. "Are you Tilly?" she screeched from halfway across the salon. The attention shifted. Suddenly, everyone in the salon was staring at Hannah instead of the child. The kid gave a swift nod. They looked almost embarrassed. Hannah snapped her fingers and hopped up and down. "Yes, I saw you walking in and you've got those throwback emo pants on, and I was like, this person is too cool. You have to be who I am waiting for. I used to have those pants when I was younger, but mine were hot pink. I wore them with my flaming Vans," Hannah said, her voice booming through the salon. Vane stared at her in horror. Who the fuck was this? Hannah usually used the station next to Vane's chair, but there was an empty one closer to the door. They sometimes used the extra station when they had someone processing and they'd booked a cut in between, but Vane had a vague hope of growing their team one day. Hannah's usual place was open, but she was guiding the kid to the further station, far away from the grandmother. "I am so happy to see you. I bet we have so much in common," Hannah gushed as she snapped a cape around the kid's neck. "Now, your mom told me you wanted some color done, and before we do a little trim and blow dry." The kid was still looking a little terrified, but they'd relaxed once they realized they weren't going to have to sit next to their grandmother. They also seemed utterly in awe of Hannah. But that was a feeling Vane was used to. Who wouldn't be in awe of Hannah's aggressive kindness? Just before Vane switched on her blow dryer to tune Maybe Peggy out and finish the service, she saw Hannah bend down and very softly ask, "Pronouns?" The kid's face was utterly transformed. Their eyes widened, and they realized they were safe in Hannah's chair. "They, them. And my name is Kai." Hannah's face was a picture of understanding. "We're so very glad you came in today, Kai. Sit back, and I'll get your color mixed up, okay?" And that is the end of chapter 3. That's where we're going to pause today. Oh, I didn't think that was going to get to me. It's been about 6 months since my grandmother passed. My grandfather was the one that I found out about on social media. My grandmother had cancer for about 5 years. And Christmas and New Year's, which is happening right now, not as you're seeing this, but as I'm recording it, was her favorite time of the year. And I would give everything to see my grandma again. In addition to that, I was Hannah. I was a mousy girl in a salon, presenting as a girl. I used they, them pronouns, but nobody ever got it right. And I was in a salon one day, and there was this bitchy old lady in my chair. And I'm sorry if the person who I'm talking about sees this, but the woman was evil. Like, not evil, like, sorry, just called your grandma evil. But like, the woman was not very kind to me while I was doing her blowout service. I didn't spray her in the face. That was wishful thinking. And the kids conversation I've had, but wasn't the same person. That was also someone in my chair. One day I'll tell you about that lady. When this kid comes in, and it clicked immediately that they were uncomfortable, that they were trans. I don't know how I knew in my brain. I don't know what it was that tipped me off, but I was like, after listening to the old lady and seeing the child, I just went, not today. They're going to be so safe. And out of nowhere, I was no longer this like quiet, like, I was like, hey baby, I'm so glad you're here. And I was like, everyone looked at me like I had grown 7 heads, because that was the most any of my salon coworkers had heard me say. And when we got to the chair, I made sure I had their correct pronouns. I made sure the grandma was out of the salon, and I made sure that they got the best hair that I could do in the time that we had available to us. And it was a really good afternoon for me. And I hope it was a good afternoon for them too. Anyway, that's a tough one. Come back next time after I've had a cry and some dinner, and we will do chapter 4 and maybe chapter 5 of Vane Attraction. And until next time, make sure you go outside, get a walk, get a snack, take a nap, take your meds, take care of yourself. You're the only you I have. And I'll see you next time.